Hello and welcome to the Wire Primetime. I'm Siddharth Varadarajan. We are roughly 10 to 14 days away from the first day of polling in a very important general election. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is trying for a third term. And ranged against him is, of course, the India Alliance, a loosely sort of knit coalition in which the Congress party is the principal player, but you have other regional parties that are contesting against the BJP-led NDA. Last week, the Congress party came out with this manifesto. And of course, manifestos are always documents which make all kinds of promises. And the Congress party's manifesto is no different. There's plenty of stuff on employment, on health, on defense, foreign policy, and so on and so forth, because it's intended as a critique of the last 10 years of Narendra Modi's government. But the manifesto also focuses somewhat on important issues surrounding freedom for the ordinary citizen. In fact, there's a whole section in the introductory paras where the Congress party makes it a point to say that they are trying to address the atmosphere of fear which has begun to surround journalists and people at large because of the way in which laws have been used to censor people, to arrest people. Activists have been arrested. Human rights activists have been arrested. The denial of bail has emerged as a serious problem for people, particularly those arrested under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act or UAPA and various other laws. And the Congress party's manifesto essentially, under sections on upholding the Constitution and on media freedom, makes what I think is quite a comprehensive attempt to address some of these issues. They don't always go the whole hog. They perhaps don't fully go to the heart of the problem, but it's refreshing in my mind to see in the manifesto at this time recognition of the fact that the media today in India is under some stress, that media freedom has emerged as a critical issue, and that many of the rights and freedoms that people have taken for granted in the past, the freedom of assembly, for example, freedom of speech, freedom to use the internet, freedom to eat what you would like or to love and marry who you want. All of these freedoms have come under strain. And to my mind, it's important that the Congress manifesto has at least flagged these as issues that they want to bring before the electorate. Joining me today to discuss all of these issues, the manifesto's sections dealing with freedom in general and the media in particular, but also questions of the future of the judiciary, is Arti Raghavan, Bombay-based lawyer, somebody who has been active in litigating on many issues related to media freedom. She is the lawyer for Kunal Kamra in the comedian's challenge to the constitutionality of the information technology rules, particularly those sections that deal with the government's insistence on giving itself the right to declare news as fake and to order its takedown in some shape or form. So Arti Raghavan, thank you very much for joining us today for this conversation on the Congress's manifesto.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thanks for having me.
So let's broadly divide our time into three sections. I would say the first section has to do with the Congress manifesto's observations and promises broadly in the arena of freedom, where they have spoken about the need to defend the Constitution. And then there is a section on the media, which is a separate section, and we will come to that also in due course in this interview. And then finally, of course, some brief remarks that the Congress manifesto makes about selection of judges and guaranteeing the independence of the judiciary. But let's start with the Congress's promises on individual liberty. You've read the manifesto.
Yes.
What sticks out as important for you in terms of promises that the Congress party is making that address issues that are today of burning concern?
So I would probably flag it out under four heads. I think the first is its commitment to the freedom of speech and expression, or highlighting concerns and sort of flagging out how it wishes to address attacks on freedom of expression. The second is personal liberty. and how it addresses arbitrary, etc. The third would be religious freedoms and how it seeks to sort of restore religious freedoms that it believes have been undermined by the current government. And the fourth is in terms of access to justice and the rule of law. So these are the four heads. And while I agree with you that it's good and useful that the opposition has highlighted these freedoms that are under attack, I think it also bears some scrutiny as to how it proposes to deal with it. And it is as important to analyze what hasn't been said as, also appreciating what has in fact found its way into the manifesto.
So let's start with personal liberty, if that's okay with you, and
sure.
and focus on what's been highlighted and what are the key silences or omissions.
Well, I mean, I think just straight up, what you do notice if you were to look at the 2019 Congress manifesto and the current one, is that there is no mention of any amendment to the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which is a legislation that has given the armed forces a troubling amount of impunity. And it isn't anyone's case that civilian deaths at the hands of the armed forces have seen a decline in recent times. There have been very concerning incidents, and it continues to be in force in multiple states in India. But I mean, it's a little disquieting that there is no mention of it in this time's manifesto. The other is that while there is an express nod to positively enacting a law that provides for bail being the rule and jail being the exception, what we have seen in the last 10 years is the weaponization of two statutes, central statutes in particular, the UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, both of which have rather draconian provisions in terms of bail, which effectively reverse the burden of proof and the presumption of innocence at the pre-trial stage and make bail very difficult, if not virtually impossible. And while I mean it is good that they propose to enact such a legislation which they say will address all criminal laws, I think a specific reference to amending these two these two statutes would also have been helpful.
In fact, there's no reference to the PMLA or UAPA explicitly at all. Yeah, and I suspect the PMLA. I remember in the some of the BJP's campaign speeches before the manifesto came out, and there was speculation that the BJP leaders were saying that the Congress party is so corrupt that they want to get rid of the PMLA. So I think maybe that weighed on the Congress party not wanting to position itself as somebody diluting the PMLA. But yeah, these are glaring omissions given that the PMLA has been weaponized, and particularly the denial of bail provisions to kind of cripple the opposition on election eve.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, also, I think what's worth bearing in mind is that at the end, legislative intervention can only go that far. And a huge part of the blame lies at the doorstep of the judiciary that really any government has no control over. Because ultimately, the protection of liberties, any citizen would look to the judiciary. And whether it comes to individual instances where bail has been sought and denied, or in cases where these provisions have been challenged and either not adjudicated upon or decided at all, as is the case with the amendments to the UAPA, or in the case of the PMLA, where the judiciary, the Supreme Court has upheld it. Right. So, I mean, that's a larger issue that unfortunately these elections cannot answer, nor can any government.
What on the other aspects of individual liberty, the manifesto says that it will uphold the freedom of people to love who they want and to eat what they like. How much power does the central government actually have? I presume this is a reference, implicit reference to the so-called love jihad laws, anti-conversion laws, and other kinds of laws that BJP ruled states have passed in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe even longer actually. How much power would, if the Congress were to come to power in some shape or form, how much ability would they have to actually implement this part of the manifesto?
Well, I mean, a lot of these are controlled within states. The police respond to state government. So whether it's instances of anti-cow slaughter laws being misused, whether it's lynching of people who are involved in cattle trade or cattle slaughter. These are not matters that the central government necessarily has much control over. So you're absolutely right about that. These are good in theory, but very difficult to implement. I think it's also interesting that they make an express reference to preserving the right to dress as you want to. And as far as I know, since the Congress government has come into power in Karnataka, while it originally stated that it intended to roll back on a lot of these measures, including anti-conversion laws and the hijab ban, it seems to have stalled, at least as far as I know. And that's disappointing. So while it's heartening to see these statements in the manifesto, I think one does wonder whether they'll actually act on it if they were in power. Yeah. But there is one aspect that perhaps is, it's a central law that governs it and is increasingly being used, which is the Places of Worship Act, a central legislation which it basically preserves the religious nature of any place of worship as it stood at the time of the independence, with the exception of Ayodhya and the Ram Mandir. Yes, and Babri Masjid, yes. But now we've had increasing instances of the courts approving of surveys by the ASI and, a gradual erosion of the protections that were promised under the Places of Worship Act. So, perhaps the central government under different, should it be the Congress, may take a less aggressive stand and may not demand such changes, may not mobilize the ASI for such inquiries. So I think that's something to consider.
I mean, I suppose the problem there is that actually the courts have been kind of proactive in weakening the hold of this law. I mean,
absolutely.
You had kind of, I suppose, people connected to the Sangh Parivar who were litigating in Varanasi and then in Mathura and so on, but there was no, the BJP officially never took it up, and then you suddenly had the Chief Justice, no less, coming up with this interpretation of the Places of Worship Act, that while its status couldn't be changed, but there was no harm in conducting a survey to determine its status. Of course, to what end is the question that anybody would immediately ask. Yeah. But since then, we've had these surveys, and any number of disputes have once again been actually resuscitated in Uttar Pradesh, in Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and so this is something which the party, if elected, could deal with. Let's look at some other sort of personal liberty related issues quickly. We know that over the last 4 or 5 years, freedom of assembly, freedom of association has also come under some strain. But again, this is sort of at the state level, right? At the kind of provincial level. Again, it's not clear what if a BJP-led government in Haryana wants to prevent farmers from gathering. There's very little that the union government could do, arguably.
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's between the state government and constitutional courts.
Right.
When determining the contours of this right. So, while it's great in the manifesto, but it really remains to be seen how it could be implemented.
Yeah. If at the end of the day, I mean, many of the, correct me if I'm wrong, but many of the kind of constitutional, I mean, when they say defend liberties that the Constitution has guaranteed, a lot of this is really up to the courts. And I'm wondering actually whether we should jump straight into what the Congress manifesto is saying in terms of selection of judges and independence of judiciary, and come to the media a little bit later. Sure. The Congress manifesto speaks about about a National Judicial Commission, which is something the BJP had attempted and had actually passed a law which the Supreme Court struck down. What makes you think the Congress's sort of attempt would be would be more acceptable, and B, would pass muster finally at the Supreme Court level?
Well, I think the only reason it would pass muster is if the manifesto itself says that the composition would be decided by the Supreme Court. So, in that sense, I don't think if the Supreme Court is deciding it, it's unlikely to strike it down. But I think this is again something where the devil is in the detail. And really, until you have such a body and know its composition and its working, and how, more importantly, not just its composition, but how transparent and accountable it is. Because one of the biggest issues plaguing judicial appointments, judicial transfers, and elevation from high courts to Supreme Courts is simply that there is no, the public is in the dark about the basis for a lot of these decisions. And that is extremely problematic. So I think until that is addressed, until the judiciary realizes that accountability is important in order to preserve confidence in the judiciary, and the central government demands that of the judiciary, it's not really going to alter status quo significantly.
I mean, I'm wondering, Arti, given that there's been some controversy about post-retirement jobs for judges, right? We've seen Justice Gogoi go to the Rajya Sabha. We've seen the kind of controversial selection of Arun Mishra as head of NHRC, National Human Rights Commission. You know, a judge who never really known for his fidelity towards human rights throughout his career, is picked for this sort of important job. And then you have Justice Khanwilkar, who is kind of pitchforked into heading the Lokpal. And then, you know, one of the judges who was involved in the Ayodhya judgment becoming a governor. I'm just wondering whether, apart from having a kind of neutral body for appointing judges to the judiciary, one also needs some kind of a broader collegium for selecting judges for some of these post-retirement jobs too, so that, you know, the potential conflict of interest between involved in the executive cherry picking a judge for a lucrative post-retirement sinecure, this is done away with. If the selection process involves, you know, members of the opposition and other upstanding people, perhaps this post-retirement business could also be cleansed a little bit.
That's definitely something worth considering, though I'm not as sure about a neutral body when it comes to actual judicial appointments. I think it's slightly illusory whether there can be a body that's ever shielded enough from executive influence. And honestly, I think it's perhaps time to acknowledge that in no country in the world is judicial appointment really devoid of executive influence. It's really about how you ensure that once they're appointed, they're not only independent, but also accountable and transparent in its functionings. So yes, while post-retirement benefits may unduly influence judges while they're sitting, I think just enabling civil society and citizens who scrutinize the actions of judges and make them more accountable without having the chilling effects of, you know, various laws that restrict your ability to engage to engage and criticize the actions of the judiciary would help in a huge measure. Which also, the manifesto also mentions a body that could be constituted in order to look into complaints against sitting judges. And interestingly, this Judicial Complaints Committee, the manifesto recommends staffing it with retired High Court judges of the higher judiciary, High Court and Supreme Court judges. And I don't think we have a very, a very positive history of judges judging judges objectively or fairly. So I think some engagement with, you know, what this commission would look like, how it could make itself more transparent, how inquiries against judges can be made something that the public knows more about and has more access to, is definitely something that's worth exploring. It's
so again, you're sort of saying that the manifesto has taken a step in the positive direction, but the devil is sort of in the detail, as it were. Arti, we have 10 minutes, and 10 minutes left, and I want to turn to the media now. When I was reading the media section, I was struck by the declaration that they want to do away with criminal defamation. They want to put an end to this sort of knee-jerk internet bans. They want to protect journalists from arbitrary arrests and seizures, which has been a major problem, and surveillance, over the last decade. They want to strengthen the Press Council of India to deal with paid news and fake news, as opposed to, I would imagine, having that as something which the executive decides. And they also want some kind of a restriction placed on cross-media ownership. In other words, there's a recognition of the importance of monopoly power in the media, and they want transparency. They want media companies to declare their ownership and sources of revenue, which I think is something which has been mooted in the past, but no government has ever seriously raised this as an issue for obvious reasons. There's talk of revising the broadcasting bill, the telecoms bill, but there are also silences. It doesn't say much about the IT rules. Doesn't say anything actually explicitly about the IT rules. So net, how do you assess the promises that the manifesto makes on media freedom?
Well, I think it charts out a lot of the concerns over the last decade very well. It's definitely a positive statement in favor of freedoms that have been severely eroded under the BJP. But I mean, starting off with one of the most concerning trends, that is internet shutdowns, for which we have the dubious distinction of being ranked world number one by a significant margin in the highest number of internet shutdowns for a while. I feel that just a statement about ending indiscriminate and arbitrary internet suspension, it is positive, but then it again goes to the existence of rules that are in its very nature very arbitrary, the internet suspension rules. And also the way in which it's been implemented and the way in which courts have given excessive latitude to governments to violate these rules, but not interfere in the violation. And we've seen that in Jammu and Kashmir, we've seen that in Manipur for a long time, despite having a very clear pronouncement on internet freedoms in Anuradha Bhasin in the context of the Jammu and Kashmir internet suspension. The very principles laid down there have never, in fact, been implemented in order to restore internet when it has been suspended in various parts of the country. So I think, again, a clearer commitment to perhaps, changing these rules, severely limiting the power of the executive to suspend the internet. And of course, again, this comes back to the intractable problem of how the judiciary approaches these issues and sees them as disproportionate reactions by the executive and actually prevents it or undoes these actions. But unless that happens, I think these commitments may not really translate. But it's good to see this at the forefront. But as you mentioned, a significant omission are the IT rules and the blocking rules, both of which have been weaponized by the government to ensure arbitrary takedowns. The blocking rules, in fact, require that an individual who is the subject of it is given notice, is provided a hearing, and a reasoned order as to why the information on the account is being taken down or blocked. And these have only been observed in their breach. The courts have not been able to intervene. And we have social media intermediaries who are in a position not to really take on the government. You've had, sort of leaders of the social media intermediaries saying that they're not in a position to risk defiance of these orders, even if they think that they are invalid, unlawful, or disproportionate. And requirements under the IT rules, such as having an Indian resident be a compliance officer who's personally liable, makes them reluctant to really take on the government, even if they feel the orders are unjustified. And I think it would have been good to see what the Congress's position on the IT rules was.
In fact, given the rash of takedown orders that we've seen, particularly in the context of the farmers' movement and lots of other examples, it is surprising to have the Congress manifesto completely silent on the IT rules, and even IT. The Parent Act, the IT Act, Section 69A has now been weaponized to delete content from Caravan, magazine. They were forced to delete an entire article that you can legally buy from a shop. I mean, the physical
Yeah.
product is available, but the IT Act was invoked to make them delete that. And we ran an excerpt in the Wire, and we were also ordered to take that down. So it's manifest the way in which 69A and the IT rules are being abused. So that's a kind of glaring omission. But what about criminal defamation, Arti? I mean, we know that Rahul Gandhi joined Subramanian Swamy back in 2014 or 2015 in that big case heard by Chief Justice Deepak Mishra, which wanted the criminal defamation struck down. They were unsuccessful, and since then Rahul Gandhi's gone on and gotten convicted. But the fact that the party is now saying that they will do away with this is, I think, it's positive. Of course, you still leaves the problem of civil defamation there. But what's your sense of this proposal?
No, it's definitely a positive step. I think it's a much needed one. It should have been done decades ago, but better late than never. I'm only slightly concerned by their other suggestion in the context of defamation, which is a speedy remedy of damages through civil action. And it makes me wonder in a legal system which is as riddled with delays as ours is, why should defamation be given any sort of priority? Because ultimately defamation cases are brought about by privileged individuals, and civil defamation cases can also have a chilling effect. A claim for exorbitant damages can sort of silence less endowed media houses, independent journalists. So I'm not sure why they had to offset the decriminalizing of defamation with a remedy of speedy damages.
Quite right. There's also sort of a promise in the manifesto about sort of making changes in the Cinematograph Act. We know that the sort of entire film censorship, quote unquote, architecture in India is very arbitrary. Are there changes there that you would like to see? I don't know how much you've dealt with the CBFC sort of mechanism in your work as a lawyer, but is there something that you think there is a remedy that needs to be attempted?
Well, I mean, I think I agree with what they say in that the certification process must be less arbitrary and transparent. But I think that a lot has changed since the Cinematograph Act. I think the advent of web series content that is on OTT platforms, which don't necessarily come under the CBFC's purview, and are now subject to an entirely different regime. And we've seen some troubling developments on that front in the last several years, where a lot of speech laws, a lot of criminal laws that regulate speech have been weaponized by
Can you give us
either
some examples? You were
one
talking about
prominent example. Tandav, yes. Tandav is one prominent example where the web series was supposed to loosely portray developments in the Indian political landscape in the past decade. And there were FIRs that were filed in multiple locations. And the unfortunate development was that the courts did not grant interim protection to the makers of these series. And that had it was a very palpable chilling effect that you saw on content. I mean, there was extensive news reports about it, more from the foreign media than in the Indian media, unfortunately, about the number of shows or movies that were shelved as a response to this, series that were greenlit that ultimately never went into production as a result. And this is censorship without even actually having a formal body sitting and going through the process of certifying, because you simply prevent content from being made. And it's not just when it offends political sensibilities, it's also religious sensibilities of the majority of the Hindus. And that, I think, again, you've seen the reluctance of courts to actually intervene, quash frivolous and vexatious complaints, and sort of shield or shelter content creators from criminal prosecution. Right. So that's been a worrying development. And again, it would have been good to see some statement and acknowledgement of that in the manifesto.
So the problem actually, in other words, what you're saying is that the problem goes actually well beyond what you could fix through amendments to the Cinematograph Act, simply because of the way in which other laws are being used or misused to target cultural content, and the
Yes.
willingness of courts to actually side with the hecklers or the cancelers, and those who are
Yeah.
so quick to take offense. That pretty much, we have, Arti, we've covered. We're kind of out of time here, and I think we've tried to look at and explain to viewers the broad provisions in the Congress manifesto that deal with freedom, that deal with media freedom in particular, but also constitutional protections that are due to every citizen, and the kind of stress that they've come under over the last 10 years, what the Congress promises to do, how many of the promises are well intentioned, but the devil is in the detail, and there are some glaring silences and omissions as well. But nevertheless, I think it's a good thing to have a manifesto of this kind, which provides food for thought, which uh, helps us to focus our attentions in election season on issues that are actually very, very important, and that tend to be just ignored or brushed aside. So I think that full marks to the Congress for attempting to shine a light on this, even if the actual suggestions and provisions themselves do fall short here and there, and may not be as easily implementable as we would all hope. Arti, once again, thank you very much for joining us, and thank
Thanks,
you to the
Siddharth.
viewers for being with us. Stay tuned for another edition of Why Primetime, coming to you in a few days.